Good morning from Washington, D.C. Good afternoon and good evening to all our viewers and panelists joining from across the world. My name is Anit Mukherjee. I'm a policy fellow at the Center for Global Development. It's my great pleasure to moderate this discussion on how we can harness digital technologies and payments to support people and small businesses throughout this COVID-19 crisis and beyond. To do that, we have a very distinguished panel whom I'll introduce shortly and hear their views on how effectively to manage the crisis, both for people and for small businesses. As we are all acutely aware by now, COVID-19 has disrupted economies across the world at an unprecedented scale. IMF has projected a global recession, and the World Bank estimates that over 100 million people will fall into poverty. As the pandemic has unfolded, the immediate priority for governments has been to prevent loss of lives and mitigate loss of livelihoods as a result of the lockdowns. But what we also see is that almost without exception, governments have announced relief packages. They vary in ambition, strategy, and fiscal outlay. The most frequent measure is to transfer cash to people. By some estimates, almost 1 billion people are getting assistance through scaled up cash transfer programs. A vast majority of them are in developing countries, but how are they receiving the payments and what are they doing with it? Does everyone who need it get it? That's a very important question. Most governments have also announced some form of support to businesses, especially small and medium enterprises. Some have schemes to pay employers to keep workers on their payroll, and this we have seen across both developed and developing world. Others have announced change in regulations, access to credit, and resources for upgrading their business processes, getting ready once the lockdowns are lifted. But the question of informality remains, and this is something that we'll explore in this conversation. What happens, for example, to small entrepreneurs getting their income from unregistered businesses, especially in the urban informal sector, a sector which has been really badly hit? What have been their experiences and what support do they need to tide over the crisis? One common thread that's emerging is the use of technology. The response to COVID-19 suggests a boost to the use of remote digital systems, partly due to the nature of the pandemic and the restrictions on mobility. As we have stated in our recently released CGD report on citizens and states, the building blocks are already there in many of the developing countries. Digital ID systems, access to financial accounts, mobile technology, some of the key building blocks. But as we'll hear from our panelists, the COVID-19 crisis has clearly demonstrated that for both people and SMEs, small and medium enterprises, there are important questions how to deploy them quickly and how we can make them more inclusive. With that, and without further ado, let's dive straight into the discussion. We have with us Alan Gelb. Alan is Senior Fellow at the Center for Global Development. Alan joined CGD after a long and distinguished career at the World Bank, heading the Africa region for several years, and more recently has focused on development implications of digital systems more generally, particularly digital ID and digital payments, and has a book on the development implications of biometric ID. Welcome, Alan. We are delighted to have Juan Carlos Thomas and Alice Waweru from TechnoServe, an organization that has helped small farmers and entrepreneurs build sustainable businesses in over 25 countries for several decades now, actually. Juan Carlos is the Global Director of Entrepreneurship at TechnoServe, where he heads the development and deployment of best practices to support entrepreneurs and small and growing businesses in the organization's projects across Africa, Latin America, and India. And he's from Chile, and you will see that he comes from a really picturesque region from there. We will all want to go and visit it sometime when the lockdowns are lifted. Alice is the entrepreneurship portfolio lead for TechnoServe Kenya, and is also the regional program manager of the Pan-Africa Youth Entrepreneur Development Program, which is implemented in Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Cote d'Ivoire. This is a region which is really dynamic before COVID, and there are several implications of the lockdowns in all these countries. And she has over 18 years of experience helping small and medium enterprises grow and scale So we are delighted to have her perspective on the challenges and opportunities for entrepreneurs in the region. And finally, we are very grateful to have Mr. Manoj Sharma. Manoj is the founding partner of Microsave, a respected development consulting firm based in India with operations in over 20 countries. He has a wealth of experience in both SME development. He was formerly with the Small Industries Development Bank of India and digital payments, and has been a guiding force in India's digital payment system over the last decades. A very warm welcome to all the panelists, and more importantly, a warm welcome to all of you, our viewers, tuning in from across the world. We really appreciate your contribution to the conversation. And if you have any questions for the panelists, and I'm sure you do, I mean, this is going to be a fascinating conversation. So please submit them to the email address events@cgdev.org. If you are social media capable, then please tweet with the handle @CGDEV with a hashtag CGDTalks, or submit your comments via YouTube comment box. My colleagues will be monitoring them and will pass them along as we have during the conversation. So, Alan, let me turn to you. When in all the crisis, every crisis when it unfolds, we say this is different. But maybe the COVID-19 crisis is different. You have handled crisis before in your capacity at the World Bank and for many years. This crisis the response seems to be led by developing countries themselves. They are designing, they are putting up the money, and they are implementing systems. Some of them are digital, mostly in terms of social assistance. Since you've looked at this area for many years, how have the governments been able to use these payment systems? How have they digitized? Have they been digitized globally? What are the key elements of a well-functioning digital payment system that works well for both people and firms? So, and which countries stand out in their response?
Thank you very much, Aneet. And thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. It's a great pleasure. First, briefly, I mean, as we all know, we've seen a lot of growth of digital systems, payment systems and others in recent years. Both the general payment systems and the systems that are used to transfer money from government to people, the so-called G2P payment systems. And in some countries, like in Africa particularly, this has been driven, these digital systems, by mobile payments, and in others, they've been bank-based with mobile wallets and other facilities. So there's quite a variety. But this transition is not complete. It's in process. And going back to the report that you mentioned, Aneet, it's clear, for instance, as we found, that if you are poor, out of the workforce, with little education and a woman, the probability that you will have a financial account is very low in many countries. So there are a whole lot of factors which affect whether people have access to these systems. We know that cash is still playing a major part in transactions, especially for the lower value transactions that poor people make very often. And that often the merchants are not set up to accept digital payments, right? And you have a kind of chicken and egg problem here, because unless there are a lot of people wanting to make digital payments, it's not worth the while of the businesses to invest in the digital payments. So that is often a hole in the middle of these systems. And of course, some systems are not yet interoperable. So in the area of the government-to-person payments, many of them have moved some distance towards digital payments, whether through cards or other mechanisms, but not too many yet pay into regular financial accounts, whether bank accounts or mobile money accounts, which allow people to access more services. And so we've seen a very positive shift, and we see this in most surveys, like the one we did in Bangladesh, looking at mothers who receive their education supplements in cash. But it's still a work in progress. And the people who do get the digital payments always pretty much now cash them out. They have, they simply are taking their digital payments, cashing them out, and then proceeding as before. So it's a mix. And particularly in the area of COVID, I mean, the cash out has some challenges because we often see clustering at cash out points, we see crowding, and we see congestion. So there's a way to go. What do we need to do to move forward? Well, it's very clear that in general, we need easier access for users to digital systems, and we need to make sure that the payment systems deliver value in terms of low cost, high convenience, and security. And there's a whole policy agenda here that I won't go into at complete length, but we've seen many examples. For instance, the way that mobile money and the range of services that it provides have spurred adoption in countries like Kenya. We've seen examples like in Tanzania, where there's been a big boost to the use of digital payments once interoperability has been secured. We've seen countries that have brought down the cost of mobile data. This is very important. I mean, it's remarkable that in Africa, the cost of a gigabyte of mobile data is around $4. In India, it's down to about 26 cents. And this is because of release of spectrum and very great competition. So a lot can be brought down. Tiered KYC. It has to be easy for people to access bank accounts and to have payment interfaces that people can actually use without being highly literate. Let's talk about the COVID-19 question. What we see is countries are building on the digital infrastructures that they have invested in, and they're using these to expand access to services and transfers. These are the ID systems, the mobile communications, and the payment systems. And the pandemic is putting these systems under real stress, right? And it's forcing them to innovate and learn. And this experience is going to carry over to the future. And the result of this pandemic is going to be a huge boost, I think, to the use of digital systems in the future. Some systems are being scaled up, and that's much easier when they are digital. But it's also important to reach out to new people who are not part of existing systems. And here we've seen the growth of a whole new generation of transfer programs, which are almost all digital. There are examples of this in countries like Namibia, countries in Pakistan, countries like South Africa, which are using all digital process to onboard people, to identify them, to screen them, and hopefully sometimes to pay them as well. So this is something that I think we're going to see in the future, examples drawing on of these. In all of these cases, it's very important to have a strong ID system so that people can be uniquely identified. Now, we know that not all goes smoothly when you scale up payments. When you scale up them through manual processes, it's very complicated and time-consuming. When you scale up digitally, not everything goes well. Servers get overwhelmed, systems take time to adapt and respond, and so on. But as I said, we are learning for the future, and I think this is going to be a huge investment going forward. So let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. I think this is fascinating because, as you said, there is a transition, but the transition is not complete. And we don't know whether the COVID-19 crisis comes at the right time where you push countries towards a faster transition towards digital systems, building digital systems, including the cost of data, which we will come back towards the end of the conversation. Juan Carlos Thomas, we have seen a huge upsurge in the use of digital technology in response to COVID. And as I mentioned, as in the start of discussion, this is just because of the nature of the pandemic itself. But the technology diffusion was happening even before COVID, right? So how has this changed the perspective from the SMEs themselves in developing countries? Are they much more eager now to say that, well, I mean, if this kind of disruption happens, we need to be prepared? So how has COVID changed the business as usual? And from your vantage point, how do you see that shift? Juan Carlos? We might come back to Juan Carlos in case there are issues getting him on. Alice, if I can turn to you. Oh, there you are. Okay. Yeah,
Sorry.
there you go. Super. But where is the beautiful Chilean background? I mean,
yeah. I needed to join through a different device. So sorry
okay.
for the change in the background. Should I assume you already asked the question you say you were going to ask me, or
Kind of. So I was saying that you have a global perspective on the SME trends globally. You're working in the field. You're working with small and medium enterprises, helping them scale. But just the nature of the COVID-19 crisis has kind of enabled or given an impetus towards the adoption of technology, right? But that has been a trend over many years. How has COVID-19, the crisis, the lockdowns, the move towards remote systems, how has it changed or will change the business as usual from the perspective of firms and small businesses going forward? That was my question.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, as you and Alan previously said, the COVID crisis has further accelerated a world that was already moving to digitalize many aspects of our life and business, and SMEs in particular are not exempt from these changes. And lockdowns and social distance measures have affected business in so many ways that the first thing to address is survival. They're threatened in an unprecedented number of directions. So we see reduced or absent demand in some industries, challenge to operations, entrepreneurs, particularly women, having trouble to find time to run their business themselves. They need to do homeschooling as well and multitasking even more than before. Some of them are struggling to access inputs and funding for sure. This is adds to build a lot of stress and uncertainty. We don't know how things are going to evolve. Makes things even worse. So as we're helping entrepreneurs in coping with this crisis, we need to we have realized that we need to revisit the whole business model with them to address all the challenges that are coming from all these different directions. And when trying to find creative solutions, usually technology is present. So we have, and in many ways, of course, digital payment, as Alan discussed, is one of the leading growing technology adoptions that we're seeing. But also digital marketing now can reach people in lockdowns that traditional marketing ways could not do before. Online shops are now even more appealing solution than a brick and mortar shop. And remote work technologies which we are all experienced now are a few examples of common tech solutions that are helping entrepreneurs cope with this crisis. So in this context, I think you asked me about what are entrepreneurs doing and how they're coping with this. And I think the key for success is basically keeping an entrepreneurial attitude. Don't take things for granted. Keep looking at your business model and how this thing is evolving, and adapting your business model in all these dimensions, and looking at technologies, but in a way where you don't adapt. As you adapt tech solutions to need and to the availability that is present in the world, and not the other way around. That's from the perspective of SME. So, for example, when we talk about digital stores or digital marketing, that in our mind, it could be a web page or it could be a Facebook campaign. But for an entrepreneur in our portfolio in Benin, it means building a WhatsApp group where he markets his products and take orders, for example. So in a nutshell, we're seeing also opportunities when you give this entrepreneurial attitude, not only to survive, but also to expand your business. We're seeing some business across the geographies, particularly in the education field, businesses were used to train people in brick and mortar places, now moving into online training. And they suddenly discover that now their market is not just their immediate community, but the whole country, or in some cases, even the whole region. Let me pause there. Happy to keep the discussion afterwards.
Thank you. Khan Academies comes to mind. I mean, whenever there was any concept that I needed clarification, I used to turn to Khan Academies. But no, the question of the point about digital marketing is really well taken. I'm hearing stories from India and other places where digital marketing through WhatsApp or Facebook is now the thing, and entrepreneurs have adapted really quickly and easily. So you see the potential when the technologies are kind of adaptable. But we'll come back to that. I think that's a really important question as we come to the solutions. Alice, let me turn to you. You are in the middle, in a very dynamic region. Small businesses were thriving, I would say. There were hiccups, of course, things like political crisis in some of the countries, but somehow entrepreneurship was very growing fast, right? About 70% of all jobs in developing countries, and I'm sure in East Africa, was entrepreneurship. And Juan Carlos mentioned that to keep the entrepreneurial attitude is going to be very important now. How have governments in the region, first give us a picture of what's happening in that region where you work, and secondly, how have governments tried to foster that entrepreneurial attitude both before COVID and post-COVID? Give us a sense of that picture.
Thank you so much, and I'm very happy to be in this panel to discuss how the entrepreneurs, especially in the developing countries, are coping with the crisis, and some of the innovations that they are adapting to respond, to develop resilience and grow through the crisis. Actually, the crisis has presented unprecedented shock to the micro enterprises, especially in these developing countries. These are businesses that provide essential goods to most vulnerable communities. They will employ 1 to 2 persons, and they are very close to the communities. And when the governments have put so many restrictions of movement, cessations, and lockdowns, there will always be that corner shop for the communities to purchase their essential goods from. However, the crisis has actually affected how they do business. It's no longer business as usual. Some of the main challenges that they faced immediately with the crisis is suddenly they had no customers. From a small survey that we did across the 4 countries that we are implementing the Pan-Africa Youth Entrepreneurship Development work in Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, and Cote d'Ivoire, we found out that 40% of the businesses had lost a big percent of their customers, either because they have traveled up country or because they can no longer be able to access those, the businesses and the shops. And at the same time, they also have lost about 40% of income of their revenues because of the lockdowns and the restricted movements. And also the fact that the communities that they serve, they no longer have sufficiently disposable income to purchase the products. One shop owners in the outskirts of Nairobi called Florence, who had her shop next to a university, and it was a bubbly business. The institutions were closed, and with that, she had to almost close her business, almost partially closing it because all her customers were suddenly gone. and she had to adapt to new way of doing business. And just like when Carlos has said about digital marketing, she had to look for a lot of new customers, start marketing her products through the digital technology, the WhatsApp groups, the Facebooks, so that she can at least keep her business thriving. For TechnoServe, what we are doing is to help businesses like this one of Florence to adapt to crisis business strategies. These are smart strategies that will help them reduce their cost of operations and even shifting to high demanded products, as well as adapting to technology that is going to help them reach their customers. But also the government, especially here in Kenya, is doing quite a lot. The government has announced some stimulus packages, reducing turnover tax from 3 to 1%, reducing VAT from 16% to 14%, and has also announced some stimulus package that will help, that's a business relief package, up to about $500 million. And I think I know more is still coming. There is a lot of interest in government to keep these small businesses that are very important to the local economies thriving. So what has been really unprecedented for me is the fact that tools that we probably never thought it would be very critical for small businesses like WhatsApp have become a lifeline for the small businesses. Putting them into groups, helping them to come together, to network together, to share their learnings together, share their challenges together, share business tips, price updates, and just for moral support have become very critical, especially during this crisis time. And this is just building a building block, a very strong building block, and a new habit that will encourage digital utilization and collaboration and sharing of knowledge that wasn't seen as much before COVID crisis.
No, thank you.
I'll pause there. Yeah.
Thank you, Alice. I think that's fascinating. One thing that we kind of forget in this is, yes, you can have a stimulus package, you can have all the fancy, tools of financial engineering and things like that, and digital tools. But in the end, it's about people getting together and keeping a business alive, right? I mean, these are small businesses, and they thrive on community. I think the university example that you said, I think it resonates everywhere. I mean, even in the United States, universities have shut down and businesses dependent on students are facing a tough time. But I think that social part of social solidarity is something that we don't kind of think through. And I think technology playing that role is fascinating. But we will, I'm sure there'll be questions, and I really encourage all our viewers to send us your questions, because that would make this discussion more lively. Manoj, let me turn to you now. You're in India, you're sitting there, but you have a regional and global perspective as well. But tell us a little bit on what has been happening in the Indian context. We heard initially there was a really big push towards pushing payments. There were payments made to women, 200 million bank accounts, Jan Dhan accounts were credited with 500 rupees each, 3 months. Then there was food. Then there was also a big package announced for small and medium enterprises. So India has kind of followed a staggered approach. How has that been? Has the strategy been successful? How has it taken on board the challenges of and also leverage the digital payments as well as the digital ecosystem that India has been building over the last several years that you have been part of? Tell us a little bit the story from South Asia, especially India.
Thanks, Anit. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, I mean, India has the digital rails, so to say, in place. And we saw this very interesting during the demonetization period when higher order banknotes were taken out of circulation, we saw an uptick in digital payments. And while the graph came down, it did not come down to the earlier levels. A new normal, so to say, was established. And similarly, during this period as well, we see an uptick in digital payments, in digital usage of digital platforms, as you said, the WhatsApp and the Facebook and so on. The key challenge, of course, when we are talking about micro and small enterprises and digital, or people and digital, is this, that, and I think Alan alluded to it in his conversation, that the cost of digital continues to be more than the cost of cash. Yeah? So this equation isn't stacked right as of now. And I'll explain that a little bit, that there is a lot of friction when we are dealing with digital payments. Yeah? Converting digital to cash is a huge friction point. Reconverting cash back to digital, again, there is friction. Digital is heavily regulated. Yeah? You will have digital that is regulated, cash that is not as regulated. Yeah? So there are challenges. So one is there is friction in conversion. There is too much of regulation around digital, and our ecosystem, the ecosystem of a typical low-income segment, ecosystem of the micro and small end of the MSME, it is largely still cash. So there are conversion costs. So who will bear these conversion costs? But we did a study of micro enterprises and small enterprises in India, in Indonesia, and Bangladesh. And some very interesting findings. I mean, in India, as you said, about a third of micro enterprises have started using digital channels for marketing, for reaching out to customers, for getting orders. So WhatsApp is, of course, the most prevalent. They're using WhatsApp more than anything else. 10% of the respondents said they have hooked up with large platforms such as the Amazons, the Flipkart, and so on. So the Flipkart is a Walmart digital platform in India. So it was very interesting to see that about half of the micro enterprises said that they are using digital payments. 60% said that they are getting less of cash payment these days than they used to earlier. So it's partly moved to digital, and it has partly moved to credit, supplies on credit, because people can't pay. But the moment you get to Indonesia, you don't see that uptake in digital. And that for us is very interesting. 27% enterprises reported that there is a decrease in cash transaction by 14%, but there is not necessarily an uptick in digital transactions. So they are basically just giving out more credit that they used to earlier. People are not paying them. And the bulk of this is going on in rural MSMEs. So rural MSMEs said 48%, nearly half of them said that we have seen a decrease in cash transaction by a median of 23%. Yeah? And similarly, you get to Bangladesh, again, we don't see an uptick in digital payments. Micro enterprise say it is all cash. Cash is king. It's still not taking place. 9% of the businesses say they are using digital channels like WhatsApp and Facebook. But when it comes to payments, it is still cash. And for us, the key underlying question is, does the digital payment infrastructure of the country also determine whether businesses would move to, whether people and individuals will move to? So the availability of low-cost digital payments is a very important decider on whether they will go or not. And just to give you an example, that the key reason, and this was also brought out, that when it comes to people who are digitally handicapped, digitally not as capable, digitally not as conversant with holding a device, we still have a digital world that seems to not work for them. So a woman who's running a small tea stall is very happy handling cash because she understands the banknotes. She knows how this can stack up. If it is 200 rupees, then what do they look like, and so on. The moment you put a calculator in front of her, it doesn't quite work. You ask her what the plus sign means, and more often than not, if she is not educated, she will say it probably means a doctor. Yeah. So the icons we have created in our digital worlds don't work for the segments, not especially for the micro enterprise segment. So I'll stop there, and then I'll come back later with some more questions.
Thank you. This is fascinating. I think all the numbers that you put out, but this whole equation that you said, the cost of digital versus cost of cash, somehow some countries have been able to manage that. And I would be interested to see if there is anybody in the audience who said that how that has happened in their countries. But I think that's a critical point and something that that we have been struggling with to understand. But thank you very much for this. And on the question of digital literacy and proficiency, I think I'll come back to Alice to hear her thoughts, because Kenya, in our mind, has been one of those countries that have managed that shift to digital, and how that can happen. But let me follow up with you on a couple of things, and specifically about India. And you said that things, the payments side and the business side are starting to get together. We have heard, I mean, the fact that there are many stories and many reports that came out of India which said, there were difficulties, especially with migrants. They were not able to access their benefits. There was less than smooth cash out processes, in spite of India having built the rails of Aadhaar-enabled payment system, remote biometrics, mobile authentication, all that stuff. Now, where do you see the weak spots in the safety nets, and how can they be strengthened? And this ties up with the question of whether somebody uses a payment or likes to use a payment in digital form or payment in cash, and consequently businesses moving to one or the other. So where do you see the challenges going forward?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I mean, I think Alan alluded to it, that the three core elements to a digital sort of interface: digital identity. India has done very well on that. I mean, it has the Aadhaar identity system. 1.3 billion Aadhaar enrollments have happened. So a great database. We have a great digital payment system, and we have a payment system which is cardless. So you don't need card, but a person can go with their Aadhaar number, the unique identity number, and just put their thumb impression on a biometric reader, and that can activate a bank account. You can deposit money, you can withdraw money. I think where we haven't done as well is the digital database side of things. That we have digital databases, but either the digital databases are stuck to a particular geography. So the whole migrant crisis was that if I'm a migrant, I will not be able to get my grains in Delhi or in Mumbai where I'm working, because my name is in a database that is in my village. So how do I get that database to seamlessly migrate with the person who is migrating? The database is sat in his village or her village. It doesn't quite work for the person. So I think that's where we faltered more than anything else, that the whole digital database, a comprehensive database that allowed people to move, wasn't there in an era where people are moving about quite as much. So on the digital payment side, 420 million people were paid $7.5 billion. That's what the power of digital was, because people were onto these digital platforms. They had bank accounts, including the 200 million women that you mentioned, getting 500 rupees each, so about $6 over a period of every month for 3 months. The Aadhaar-enabled payment system, the biometric readers payment system, through that, in March we had 35 million transactions. In April, this went up to 90 million transactions. In May, this was 106 million transactions. So it was a huge upscale, and the systems held on. They did not quite give up. Our key challenge is that how do you create a digital front-end infrastructure? Card is expensive. People tend to forget their PIN numbers. So what is it, a foolproof system that you have? And when I say that, of course, we can move to the typical smartphones that Africa has gone for. In India, our challenge is that there are 400 million people who are sub $2. They typically might not have a phone at all. There are 600 million people in the $2 to $10 a day range. And then there are 300 million people who are above $10 who typically will have a smartphone. So the above $10 smartphone user is very easy to get to. You can try and have apps and go over the top. The 600 million people, some have phones, smartphones, some have feature phones, and some have no phones. So how do I get to a segment that doesn't have a phone, that has a very basic phone, and that has a smartphone, and do so cost effectively? India has 4 million POS machines Compare that to the US, which has 14 million point of sale machines, which allows me to have a carded infrastructure which everybody can use. We don't have that. And it costs money. It costs $600 to put one point of sale machine. Just imagine that multiplied by 10 million, where it takes us. So I think those are some of the challenges that we have. The government did try. I mean, moratorium was given initially. Micro enterprises, small enterprises didn't have to repay for 3 months. Now that has been extended to 6 months. We had money, $40 billion being given as guarantees, so that you just increase the credit limit of micro and small enterprises by 20%, and without any questions asked, just pay them more, give them more credit. So I think some of these steps were taken, but some of the inadequacies of the infrastructure were also exposed, which is the entire migrant crisis. That why is it that people could not get something as basic as food, subsidized food, which they were entitled to from the government in the places where they were working? Over to you, Anand.
Oh, thank you. Though these are fantastic, and the migrant crisis, by the way, is not an India or a South Asia crisis. It's a global crisis. I'm sure Alice will also allude to that. But Alice, I think let's pick up on something that Manoj said. It's about the building of front end infrastructure, right? How do Kenya, and I've been there only once, but I was struck by how the digital payments ecosystem in some ways developed, how every business, you had a till number where you could pay to, you could pay through M-Pesa, but also Airtel money. But there is still a challenge when it comes to especially women and women entrepreneurs and their way they adopt technology and digital infrastructure, right? How do you see this challenge being addressed? Because that's not just a Kenya challenge, that's a global challenge. So tell us something about how the front end infrastructure, the payments, and digital literacy and proficiency, especially for women entrepreneurs, can be improved.
So thank you very much. I think it's important for small businesses to shift their mindset from just traditional brick and mortar way of operating and leverage digital economy to help them survive and even build their road to recovery, especially from the crisis. So we've been working with the City Foundation, the Moody's Foundation, and Layer Foundation to pilot some of the digital solutions that we believe can help improve the shops and micro enterprises to do business, mostly end-to-end, connecting all the way from probably manufacturer, distributors, or even to the customers themselves. So, for instance, many micro retailers still use pen and paper to record their transactions, and their phones just for calling and texting, even when they have smartphones. So the whole idea of what can that phone do to the micro enterprises hasn't yet been fully utilized. And it's a matter of just training and helping them understand the power that they hold on their smartphone and what more they can do with that gadget. And just as Manoj has said, 98% of the transactions in the micro enterprises is still cash-based. But we are working with the micro entrepreneurs on a daily basis towards a reality that looks more than this. Imagine a shop owner somewhere in the informal settlements of Nairobi opens their shop in the morning to customers who comes to buy bread and soap. And they record that transactions on an app. And they use M-Pesa to pay for that transaction. No cash has changed hands. And especially this time where people are fearing handling cash. And when they record that transaction in the app recognizes that the inventory is low and she's running low on soap. And it automatically connects to the distributor who delivers the products. And it triggers a payment at the distributor side. And the goods are delivered to the shopkeeper's doorstep. And at lunchtime, when she's taking a break, she's watching a video of how to make her shop much better in terms of improving the display and merchandising through some nice training videos that TechnoServe has developed. And she answers some comprehension questions which she submits to the trainer, who gives the feedback on the SMS. And in the afternoon, she receives a WhatsApp text from her fellow shop owners who are telling her about a deal that is in a supplier's, in a distributor or a supplier, about some, price reduction or some discounts. And she immediately asked the other group owners if they want to join together to aggregate their orders together so that they can enjoy a bigger quantity discount. I want you to imagine that they place a bulk order, fill a container, fill a lorry that drops the product right at their doorsteps. And at the end of the day, she's feeling very happy about her business. And she starts looking for digital loans packages from different banks and financiers to expand her shop. This is the future we are envisioning, a net-to-end future for the micro enterprises. We are piloting some of these approaches with hundreds of shop owners and micro enterprises around Nairobi, especially on the digital inventory management and connection to suppliers and ensuring some cashless transactions. And our remote training and networking has gone right now into an overdrive since the COVID pandemic started. But there's still so much room for expansion for digital tools, especially for the micro enterprises, and especially for the women entrepreneurs who may miss an opportunity of seeing what is going through on WhatsApp because she's doing domestic chores and domestic work, or doing homeschooling with children. And that's a time when training is happening. So a lot needs to be done, and especially to capture the prime time for women entrepreneurs so that they may never miss out on training opportunities and the capacity of building opportunities to learn how to utilize digital solutions that will help them build and develop their shops. Thank you, Manoj.
Thank you, Alice. That's really wonderful. I have a question from YouTube, one of the YouTube viewers for you. Are we going towards a cashless society? Double question mark.
It would be so good to move to cashless transactions. Cash is still appealing to these micro enterprises. Handling cash, it's still very appealing to these micro entrepreneurs. But there is so much determination to learn how to go to cashless platforms. Very few people know how to utilize Lipa na M-Pesa, especially the existing payment platforms. And also there's a bit of caution because of the cost that comes with it. So there's a need for promotion of cashless transactions and cashless solutions so that every micro enterprise doesn't feel that every profit they make will go to meeting the transaction cost of those solutions, but it is a way of enabling them to do business better and to develop profitability.
Thank you. I think that was a curveball, as they say in baseball, but you answered it absolutely perfectly. Juan Carlos, let me read out a question from Twitter for you. The question says, how should development organizations be adjusting their programs during COVID-19 to better support MSMEs improve their digital access? How would you respond to that?
Sure. Well, look, we just published a report on this, building on the experience of great program leaders like Alice, and we have a portfolio of around 25 different entrepreneurship programs running around the world. So we feel blessed and compelled to research around those and share those learnings with the ecosystem. So I encourage you to visit our webpage and look for more learnings on this. But if I can summarize that in 3 quick ideas, the first one is to choose tools that are accessible and easy to use to our participants. And that means deeply understanding the target audience that you are trying to address and how it engages with technology. We have developed different profiles which we try to understand, through which we try to understand our audience, looking at things like whether they're literate or semi-literate or no literate, whether they have access to a phone or a feature phone or a smartphone, a computer, do they have access to internet or broadband, etc. So looking at understanding what's the relationship with technology, what is in their hands, what they have access to is critically important. And understand that people in the same income bracket and with a similar size of business may have a different accesses. So we have programs, for example, in Mozambique that are using WhatsApp for group and text messages for other to reach out to them. So that's one thing, is like understanding what is in the hands, what are the tech capabilities of your audience. The second one is we are not only in the business of training and advising entrepreneurs, we're in the business of behavioral change. We want that the skills we help build get applied, get changed. Entrepreneurs change the way they operate their business and they become more successful or more resilient in this case because of that. So effective training and behavioral change methodologies become even more important now than they have been always. And in this particular case, being very selective with the content. So if you thought that you had to address 10 or 12 different skills before, now you may need to concentrate in a subsection of those, the ones that are more critical and most important, because the attention span you can get is going to be even more challenged than before. Making sure that you can replicate the behavioral change process we used to do face-to-face through the online platforms is also very important. We always help our entrepreneurs first connect with their own needs and challenges and aspirations, so they can see the relevance of whatever content we're going to discuss before moving into the content itself. Then we have learnings necessary to help them exercise and apply those contexts to finally apply those contexts to the particular situation. So you need to replicate that process in a virtual world and making sure that you do each and every step there. Making sure that the course structure and the way is delivered address all the constraints that the entrepreneurs may have, like the ones that mentioned Alice. Some schedules, particularly, may be more challenging than others for entrepreneurs to access, particularly for women. And checking in more regularly has become more important than ever through digital platforms. So revisiting good learning and behavioral change practices, and because they are becoming more important than ever. Last but not least, the third idea I want to convey is measure your results and learn from them. You're not going to get it right the first day. So make sure you put in place ways to measure whether the people is accessing to the content, is adopting the content, is using the content, and finally, the behaviors are being deployed in the field are very important ways. And you're going to find that some avenues and some actions are more effective than others, so you may want to double down on those and stop doing what is not working. Good news is that we have early indication that this is working. I have some stats from programs in Mozambique, for example, that have actually managed to help women from a very low tech profile adoption setting. Our parents have managed to reach out effectively and helping them actually to reopen business that were closed. So yeah, that I think will be my summary of what's working now for us.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. That's a really great tour de force. Alan, you listened to all the conversation. There is so much that we can take away from this. There is this whole issue of using the digital technologies for integrating payments and the businesses, the front end, as we talked about. But there is also this whole issue of this requires a lot of data, connection between databases, understanding what to pull from from where. There was a question on this, and by the way, we also talked about digital identity and online identity, both for individuals and businesses. There is a lot of data that needs to be warehoused and needs to be used. What do you see are the red flags, and how can, both in terms of challenges as well as opportunities of using the data that we have for making this system better? We had a question, and this is relevant to the conversation that as you wrap up. There was a question on refugees, and the question was, what is needed in terms of action to ensure that refugees can be part of a future of decent digital work and access online economies, because many of them cannot access finances and funding. And this is towards the broader issue of how you use digital identification and payments to build an ecosystem. So if you could address the specific question on refugees, but give us a sense of where we are right now and what we need to do going forward.
Okay, thanks, Aneet. I think this is a really important question. Of course, it's a big question with a lot of different dimensions. I think that many countries are, as Manoj said, they are creating rails for these systems. But underneath the rails, the underlying information systems are still very fragmented, and sometimes they're not even digitized, right? So the superstructure is there, but then you go one level down and it's really not there. And this poses both an opportunity for countries and a challenge. And the opportunity, of course, is that you can do so much more as you integrate these systems. And the challenge is you can also do so much more bad if you have highly integrated systems without proper controls. And as we've stressed in our own work, the technology is not necessarily good or necessarily bad. It depends on how you use it. And one of the concerns that some people will have, and I think it's a very good concern, is that as you move towards these more integrated systems, for example, you have a COVID program, you invite people to apply for benefits. Their applications may be screened against a whole range of databases: their employment, their assets, their bank accounts, their travel, their taxes, all of these different things. And that means that you get an integrated view of the individual from many perspectives. And this may be in a country with very few constraints, a very inadequate data protection framework. So I think this is going to be one of the questions that this digital process raises as it goes beyond just making the rails and getting down into the information systems themselves, right? So that's going to be an issue for many, many countries going forward.
And specifically, this issue of the new poor and the refugees.
Yeah.
And this is going to be an ongoing problem, right? I mean, it's not going to go away. How do you resolve that big challenge?
Yes, I think that the refugee question is a very, very, very particular one. Most of the new poor in the countries are actually citizens of those countries, and they are already integrated into the basic databases, particularly the ID database. So if you look, for example, at the way a country like Pakistan or Namibia rolls out its new programs, they will usually be based on pre-existing databases like a national ID. And when you come to refugees, there are often different systems for registration. And these systems do not integrate international systems, partly because of concerns over the particularly vulnerable privacy-related issues concerning refugees. So one of the important aspects of this is to find an efficient interface between the refugee data systems and the domestic data systems in a way that doesn't compromise the particular vulnerabilities of refugees. And then, of course, there are a whole range of regulations which go beyond the digital sphere. They go in terms of whether refugees are able to work, whether they're able to access, whether they're able to open bank accounts, and all of these questions. But underlying this, there is a question of digital integration, which is an important one and also a difficult one.
Thank you, Alan. I think we've hit the 11 o'clock mark and respect everybody's time. This has been a fascinating conversation. I think we have addressed many issues, but there are so many others that we haven't yet even touched upon. But thank you all to all the panelists, and especially those joining from different time zones. We really appreciate and value your comments and your thoughts and sharing that with this amazing audience that we had today. Thank you very much, and goodbye.